I'd love to tell you that like I masterminded that whole thing. I didn't. I just was like, oh, why doesn't anybody do blowouts? You know, I was a hairstylist. If there was one thing I was really good at, it was blowouts. And that was it. And this is why I built this business around this. The copycats were trying to emulate what we were doing, but they couldn't quite do it. Don't get me wrong. I was very scared. And I used to like drive by, like, you know, trying to look in the,
Check them out.
We had so many cease and desist letters. Like it was such a crazy time. But we also knew we had to move fast.
And we're back.
And we're back.
Today's episode, I am so excited for. We are chatting with the one and only Alli Webb, the founder of DryBar. From going from a mobile styling business to all of her mommy friends all around Los Angeles to then launching the very first DryBar to now over 150 DryBar locations, being a guest shark on Shark Tank, now starting a collective and mentorship that she's doing with other female founders. She is an all-around powerhouse. Alli, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you on today to
thank you.
unpack everything that you're doing. You're such a successful entrepreneur. You're up to so many different things. So we're really excited to kind of get into all of it. But we always like to start it off with where your career actually started. So if you could take us back as far as you want, maybe where you would say it really, you kind of kicked it off.
Well, I mean, I think an important element of my story, which I like to talk about a lot, you know, just in terms of like for other people out there who are, you know, maybe going down a path that doesn't feel right, and like how do you get to the right path? And for me, I was like, you know, really lost out of high school. My friends were all going to college and I didn't want to, didn't have the grades to. And so it was kind of, I was pretty lost, you know, out of high school. And then fast forward to like, I moved to New York City and just kind of floundered around a lot, you know, and I felt like getting a job felt more right to me than going to college. And I also had like very liberal parents who like really let me live a lot, where I think a lot of kids go to college and like go crazy. Like I wasn't that kid. So, I think my path was a bit non-traditional, but hair was always kind of at the forefront for me. I grew up in South Florida. So my
Humidity.
my naturally curly hair was just so big and crazy, and I just didn't know how to maintain it. And when I was growing up, which I'm totally dating myself, but it was like Cindy Crawford and Christy Brinkley, like, and their hair was so like bouncy and shiny, and I was like, well, why does their hair look like that and my hair looks like this? And so it was just always this thing that I was enamored with, really, was hair, but it was like off to the side, and it was like, oh, well, I'm not going to do what am I going to do with this just love of hair? Like I would spend hours and hours and hours in the bathroom trying to figure out how to blow out my hair, which never went well until I got a job as a receptionist at a hair salon at the town center mall in Boca Raton, and which was like the greatest job because they would blow out my hair for free, and I would study it and I would watch it, and I was like trying to learn it, and I was just so enthralled with hair, but I still didn't pay attention to it as like a career. And, so fast forward to just being lost and not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought I wanted to work in fashion. So I moved to New York City and did that for a little while. And then I was like, I don't think this is the thing. And then my brother, who's my business partner in DryBar, he was working for Nicole Miller. I worked for Nicole Miller, which I don't even know if you guys know.
Oh, 100%.
People know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't, she was a big deal in the 80s, but, whatever. But anyways, we worked together. It was a terrible experience. And that was really when I decided to go to beauty school. And I was like, this is the only thing I can think of that I actually like doing, And so despite my parents being like, really? Like, you want to be a hairstylist? They kind of like didn't think, the narrative in my house was like, we hope she marries well, which is incredibly ironic because I've been divorced like 17 times, but which is my favorite joke. I have been divorced twice, but so it is kind of a full circle ironic joke to me because that didn't work out so well, and I actually made my own way.
You're the breadwinner.
It's just kind of funny, but I think it was just kind of that era where parents were like, they want you to marry well, and I just anyway. Fast forward to, going to beauty school, working in hair salons, moving back to New York City, working in New York in hair salons, and then meeting my first husband there and getting married and having kids and raising kids. And I thought I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I shouldn't say just, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I felt really lucky that I was able to do that, But after about 5 years of that, I was like, oh God, I have to go do something for myself. Like I felt like I was like just really losing myself. And I really felt the need to go back to work in some capacity. And so again, I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And ultimately, long story short, started a mobile blowout business.
Yeah.
Which, is really where the seed of DryBar was probably planted, although I didn't know it. It's like
totally.
I'd had all these years of experience doing hair, and what I loved about hair always was getting through the haircut to the blowout, because that's when you really saw a woman like come alive and like,
Yeah.
and so, at my like new mom pace, I was like, how could I do? Maybe I should start a mobile blowout business where I'm like running around LA blow drying all my mommy friends. And so that's what I did, and my husband at the time, Cameron, who's the creative, force genius behind DryBar, he's incredibly talented. He made me a 1-page website that was like, I think called I Straight at Home. And I thought that was like the cutest name. And lo and behold, I posted this thing on a mommy blog, and women started calling me, and I was only charging $40. So, as you guys know,
Right,
in LA,
220s.
like, yeah, 220s. That's right. That I was like, this is easy. Nobody's charging this little. I'll get busy, and I'm pretty good at hair. So, it really worked. And, I what I didn't know back then, which was like, gosh, 16, 17 years ago now, which is so crazy, was that, I was paving the way for what would become DryBar, because I learned so much from that mobile business, which was like, I was never doing women's hair in front of a mirror because I was in their living room. I was almost never in their bathroom, like their personal bathroom. So it was in their living room. And so, as a stylist, that was really freeing, because I could do their hair. Then when I was good and ready and for them to look at it, I'd say, okay, now go look in a mirror. And they would. And then there was always this like aha moment, which is why the mirrors were always behind the chairs in DryBar. And anyways, I, was getting so busy and saying no more than I could say yes, because I had to pick up my kids from like preschool at 2:00. And so my time was pretty limited.
Yeah.
And I went to my brother, who's also bald, and was like, I want to, start this. I want to turn my mobile into a brick and mortar. And he was like, he's like, women can't blow out their own hair. I was like, well, not as good as a stylist. Yeah, I had to really explain it to him. It's not the same, And so, he was on board, and, we've always been really close, and he was willing to put up the money, and he explained like sweat equity to me, which at that point I didn't know what that was. And so, we started off on this adventure to start this thing. And, it was in 2010 that we opened the first location, and really having no idea that it would turn into this phenomenon that it did. It was just like, maybe this works. I didn't know if there'd be like enough stylists out there, to support this idea. And I mean, it's so many question marks, but we did it and went for it, and it worked. 150 stores later, I sold it.
Wow. Wow.
Fascinating. I mean, whenever I hear that story, it's fascinating to me to hear you were like, I don't know, I was really lost. I was doing all these things, but I think there's something intuitively like within your soul that you were in search of it, and
100%.
you were constantly trying to find it, not letting it necessarily defeat you, but staying curious about what it could be.
And the irony is, now at this stage in my life, I'm about to be 50 in a few weeks, and which just sounds so old, but I'm almost at that. I feel almost like mentally like I'm where I was when I was in my 20s. That same, what am I doing now? And I've been in the last few years since selling DryBar, I've been in that kind of search again of like, what lights me up? Like, what do I want to be doing with my time? And that has been a big question mark. And I'm kind of starting to land on it a little now, but it's taken a few years. And that's, I think a lot of us get stuck in this, like, what I should be doing, what my parents think I should be doing, what society, all that bullshit, and then instead of being like, hey, like what really feels good, for me. And that's, that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think so many people can relate to that, of like starting out, not sure the direction, not sure exactly what they wanted to do,
Totally.
taking steps, but like leading with passion, I think always leads you towards the destination.
100%. And it's interesting because we live in such an entrepreneurial world now, which is amazing. And especially female entrepreneurs. I mean, I take a lot of pride in the fact that I was kind of amongst the first kind of tranche of female entrepreneurs, like me and Candace Nelson and Rebecca Minkoff and like that, all these women who are my friends, and, we all kind of came up together, and now there's just so many, and it's so great. I do think we kind of paved the way.
Yeah, totally.
But there is that, like, it's really leading with passion, not because I want to get rich, you know. And I think that is a big differentiator. And I think, listen, there's a opportunistic piece of all of this, which I get. And like, yeah, it's like you want to make money, you want to have this lifestyle, but if that passion and real love of what you're doing is not there, it's a steep road, you know.
And it sounds like soul's purpose too, 100%. That you were led by kind of your soul's purpose calling you that way.
Yeah. And I really like try to continuously pay attention to that as I navigate through my life, like what feels good and right to me, and it's, you know, it's kind of ever changing.
Yeah, totally.
For everybody, I think, you know.
100%. And I think the other thing that, you know, can kind of be conflicting within that is that you can be so passionate and really love what you're doing and fall all into it with work, especially as women entrepreneurs ourselves, and working primarily with female entrepreneurs all the time. We go all in, right? We go all in on that thing. But sometimes, you know, it's really hard to find, you know, that balance and seeing, is this supposed to look this way? Because it feels like this thing is working, but this thing is falling apart over here. I know you talked about this a little bit in your book, and you really embrace the idea of it is messy. It doesn't look perfect. Can you kind of talk us through kind of your take on that a little bit of the messiness and some of the maybe things you might be, I don't know, giving up, or do you feel like you have to give up certain aspects of your life in order to reach a certain level of success?
I mean, yes and no. You know, I think that it's always messy, you know, and I think the reason that I felt so compelled to write that book and to call it The Messy Truth is because, you know, it is messy. You guys know it's not linear, you know, it's like there's so many, it's like the best analogy in my brain, the best visual is like whack-a-mole, you know, it's like, it is just constantly like, you're like this, you got this fire and then now there's this one and you're like, shit, you know, like, and it is really like that, right? But life is like that, right? It's like, I feel like I think once you accept like the surrender of something's coming one way or the other, and you're not so thrown by it and so surprised, I think that's when you're living your best life, when you can like handle the throws and the punches that are coming at you. And you know, for me, I felt so compelled to talk about the messiness of the, you know, what was happening in all those years, because it was like amazing and euphoric and intoxicating and all those things. And then it was, you know, incredibly hard. I had a marriage that was falling apart. I had a kid that was in rehab. I was like, you know, I'm supposed to, it looks like I have this great life. And I did have a great life. But then on the other, but it's everything is, there's so much polarity in life, right? It's like everything is a trade-off, and like one thing is going good and then another thing is not. And it's just kind of like, how do you dance with that? You know, and I think that's really where I try to live is like, oh, you know, there's that being that again, you know, and try to be okay with it. And so, you know, and I felt especially compelled to tell all of that because there is a kind of glossy thing that we do, like that Instagram has like, you know, really perpetuated. It's like, oh, we show the highlights, and I do it too. Like I edit my pictures, like you know, it's like we're all living on the same thing. But the book really, you know, encapsulate that you know, the juxtaposition to that was my life, you know, for so many years, and that, you know, you can't. There's no such thing as having it all. And yes, things do fall by the wayside. And it's like, you know, some days you get it all right, and then some days you get it all wrong, and some days it's like some things work out and some things don't. And and again, I think it's the self-inflicted pressure we put on ourselves to have it all be perfect, and it's just not going to be, you know. And that was important to me with the book, was like almost giving people permission to not be perfect, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I love that you like very honestly share the duality. Yeah. Because I think, like you said, a lot of people just see the shiny, glossy great stuff, highlights, right? And like, oh, she won this award, she did this, oh, this happened, like, oh, her life must be perfect, right? A lot of people kind of get that. But I think really the secret of it is your perspective, right? The power 100%. Of your perspective, of going through different situations, different hardships, but being able to keep that right mindset. Yeah. So what was maybe one of the tools or tips of advice maybe you learned that helped you kind of keep that mindset of keep moving forward, I got this, when maybe things were feeling a little crazy and there was a lot of moles popping up?
Well, I feel like, you know, a big thing for me was and I talk about it all the time, is like, you know, who are the people that are on your team? Who are the people that are surrounding you? And when, you know, when I went down and things were really tough for me, like luckily we had such a strong team of people around me that like it was okay. The company was going to survive if I wasn't in, you know, at the forefront of it for a period of time. And, you know, I think it's a really important thing to point out, because as an entrepreneur or somebody leading a company, if you've set yourself up in a position where like if something, God forbid, happens to you, the whole thing implodes, it's not a good place to be, you know? And listen, like that was a process. Like for me, you know, when we started this company, it was like I did everything. I wore every hat, played every role, which is really common, right, for entrepreneurs. But I think some entrepreneurs can get stuck in that, like this tight grip, which me too, of like I want to have control, I want to, you know, and it's like it's not realistic, you know. And so it's such a saving grace for me during that time when things were getting hard was that I had this great team, everything was in place. It was like the company didn't suffer when I was suffering, and when I was dealing with my shit, the company was okay. And it was a lesson that I don't think I realized as much as I did looking back. Like, look, you know, it's like all our wisdom is looking back, right? Like seeing what, you know, what worked and what didn't. And that was something that I was really proud of and really realized, you know, and, you know, I'm building a new company right now, which I can't tell you about yet.
Oh, leave us on our edge of our seats.
Yeah, you'll know soon. But, you know, it's the same. It's like, you know, I'm taking a page from my own book of like, you know, hiring great people, having, you know, great people around me, and like how much that builds like great culture and just a great brand and company that isn't like all centered around this one person, this founder, you know, which I think it kind of was like that for me in the early days of DryBar. I had to really learn that lesson kind of the hard way.
Yeah, if we go back to that like first location of DryBar and you working in the day in, day out, all of the different aspects, and realizing that, oh my gosh, this is more than just one brick and mortar location. Was there like a specific wake up call for you, or like from going from 1 to 2 to then going from 1 to 150? I mean, it's quite the journey.
Yeah.
But it started with that going from 1 to 2.
Yeah.
What was that moment?
Well, it was so intoxicating, I think is the best word. I mean, we opened that first store like you would have thought we had been open for years, you know, because we were booked solid out of the gate. People loved the idea. It was also like at the tail end of a recession, so there was a lot of doubt. The shopping center was dead, so but it worked, you know, and very quickly, the first day, it worked, and it was busy and crazy. And you know, those first 6 months, I worked 7 days a week. Like we were open 7 days a week, so I never took a day off. I never wanted to leave it. I mean, talk about a tight grip, you know. And when I was home, I'd like be watching the cameras. Like I was crazy, but you know, it was part of, you know, the intoxication and the adrenaline and all the things that came from that. But yeah, I mean, within 6 months, we opened the second location, and quickly after that, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and like we bootstrapped it a lot. We really bootstrapped it, you know, with friends and family and angel investors in those first, like, I don't know, 6 to 10 stores. And then we raised private equity, and, you know, and then there's like a whole path that we, you know, took to open more. But yeah, it was one of those things that like we had to go and grow fast because we had so many copycats on our tails. And
Even that quick in the first like year.
Well, because, you know, what was great and amazing, and part of like our early success was that we were just getting a shit ton of press, like just so much, you know, and we were so different. It was a brand new, you know, concept in a multi-billion-dollar industry, which again, I'd love to tell you that like I masterminded that whole thing. I didn't. I just was like, oh, why doesn't anybody do blowouts? Like, you know, I was a hairstylist, and I really understood. And if there was one thing I was really good at, it was blowouts, and that was it. And this is why I built this business around this. And so the copycats were, you know, trying to emulate what we were doing, but they couldn't quite do it. But don't get me wrong, I was very scared, and I used to like drive by, like, you know, trying to look in them to
Check
see.
them out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would. I was like spy on them because I was like, it was so, you know, it almost, and violating is not the right word, but I felt so like, hey, this is my idea, and like some people would be like Sally's DryBar, and we're like, you can't call it that. And we had so many cease and desist letters. Like it was such a crazy time. And but we also knew we had to move fast, you know, and we had to like keep opening stores, which is why we ended up raising so much money. And you know, 75 million in total to get the stores were expensive to build. And so it was just like women in every city, everywhere wanted one. And so it was so exciting, and we were like on a total rocket ship for many years until we raised private equity money. And then we brought in a professional CEO who was like, I think it was like year 4 or 5. And he was like, we got to stop opening stores. We had all these stores open and like no systems in place. And like, it was just kind of a shit show in those early days. And we did have to take a step back to go forward. And then, ultimately got to 150. We started the product line, I think, when we only had like maybe 20 or 30 stores. And that was like a whole other business within a business. So that was crazy. That was crazy too. I mean, it was all crazy.
Wow.
And then I'm like, my kids were 3 and 5 when I started
Wow.
DryBar, and now they're 17 and 20,
Oh my
so
gosh,
it was
being
just
a mom on top of all of that. Like,
yeah. And luckily my mom was in the picture, and she took care of my kids, and I was traveling. I would go to every new store opening because I wanted to like tell my story to the stylists and be a part of the community. And it was amazing. I mean, it was amazing, and I'm so grateful for it. And it opened up so many doors, and it really like kind of set me up for this next kind of phase of my life. And yeah, I mean, it was just such a crazy whirlwind.
wow. I mean, so much to unpack here. I have so many questions. But I'm really curious of like when you said that you went from, just you and your brother, you were putting in the sweat equity, like you guys were kind of bootstrapping it yourselves. You went from the 1 to 2 to kind of continue to scale.
Yeah.
What was some of your first hires? What did it look like building your team? I know you mentioned how important that was and how they really held you up during some of those hard times. What were kind of some of those first hires, or critical roles you filled?
I mean, I thought I was going to be the manager of the first store. And then I was like, and I thought I would just be like floating around. And then that didn't happen. I was like forever in the first chair in Brentwood doing blowouts, watching the front desk, watching like the line of stylists to make sure everyone was happy and everything was going well. I mean, so I was managing from a chair while I was doing blowouts. It was also crazy. I mean, it was great. It was because I could see everything, and then I was like, wait, I think we need a manager. We should hire a manager. And like, I hired this amazing girl. And then, and then I didn't know anything. We didn't have any assistants. I hired an assistant. Riley was one of our first employees over there too, which, if you can believe that, and we still work together. And that was at the store level. My brother was like kind of behind the scenes, like finding us other leases and doing all of that. And then I think that we hired like a marketing manager. And what people I think don't often realize, and I haven't talked about yet either, is that those like Brentwood was crazy. It opened up to a full shop, and it was crazy. Our second shop in Studio City was like crickets when we opened it, and we were like, what the fuck happened? Like this was like the biggest thing, and now it's and we realized we had marketing, and I was going to like school like auctions and like giving discount blowouts, and like we were on Groupon, and we were doing all these things to get the business off the ground, because we're like, well, it worked really well in Brentwood and everybody seems to like it, but in Studio City we can't seem to get traction. So we were like a little panicky about it. And then sure enough, we did. And then now it's like one of the best stores in the whole company. But what we learned from that was like, oh, we actually have to do marketing before we open a store, which I think we kind of, because Brentwood opened to this like ton of press and we had tons of press all the way around, but we realized like we had to really get in front of it and put a marketing strategy together before we opened every store. It took us like 5 openings, if I'm being really honest, to figure that out. And then it was also like, we had hired a couple marketing people. We'd hired a few people to help us, but like, we were like, 5-year-olds playing soccer. Like everybody was kicking the ball. And I remember when we hired our first president before our CEO, and she was like, you can't have everybody go to every opening. And we're like, why not? It's so fun, But we just didn't like, I considered myself the visionary of this, and I knew how I wanted the experience to be in the stores, and I knew I wanted the hair to look, and all of that I really understood. But from an operational standpoint, I didn't know how to run a company. So that's where hiring, people who really did that. And our first big hire, she came from like Pinkberry and Taco Bell. So she had tons of experience in scaling. And so we realized we needed to hire more people like that who had experience. And, my brother used to always say to me, like, this is ours to mess up. Like we were onto something. We had captured lightning in a bottle, and like, don't fuck it up. That was like the big goal, and luckily we didn't.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, obviously you definitely did not fuck it up, but you maybe had some big moments maybe where you felt like, oh my God, is this going to be the end of everything? Like, did I just make the biggest mistake? Did you ever have a moment like that?
What do you mean the end of everything?
Like you made a decision that you felt like could have been the end of
we
it
had
all.
a couple of those moments. I mean, so HBO bought. We have flat screen TVs that show, we paid royalties for Devil Wears Prada and whatever. But then Girls was launching on HBO, and they came to us and were like, can we do a happy hour? We did film Entourage too, but this is different. They filmed an episode of Entourage in DryBar, which I wonder if any
flex.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, like, does anybody even know what Entourage is? You're like, yep. It was so. I mean, I feel like Entourage was like, yeah, I guess. But no, but HBO was premiering some episode of a new series of Girls, and so they came to us and they're like, hey, can we play Girls on your TV screens, and we'll pay for the blowouts for like happy hours across like 10 locations. And I think at the time we maybe had like 20 locations or something. I don't remember all the details, but whatever we did, we didn't send it out. We sent the whole thing out to our entire database, which was like 100,000 people, and we had like 1,000 spots. Which in retrospect, it's like, that was really stupid. But it didn't like occur to anybody. It was just shocking that like, we shouldn't do that. We should do this in tranches, but nonetheless, we sent out. And so everybody was pissed. Like I was getting like practically hate email from women who were like, you said you were giving a free blowout. I didn't get it. And I'm like, it's free. Like I don't owe it to you, but that was the narrative. And I was getting emails, and I remember like my brother being like, you have to stop reading these emails. Cause like, it's so sensitive to me, and this was my baby, and people were upset. And I was like, oh my God, people hate us now, and you have those moments where you can get very myopic, and you're like, oh my God, the whole thing's over. That definitely happened a couple of times. And then you realize like, that's silly, and that's not going to happen. It's going to be okay. Or even with like trusting, people we hired to do things that I would normally do. And then I'm like, okay, you have to let them do it. And I'm like, but they're going to do it wrong.
Right.
And then
I'm
it's
the
going
only
to
one
fuck up
that
the whole
can.
company, and then the whole thing's going to implode. And it's like, that's not true either. They actually have to go and make that mistake, and the whole thing's going to be fine. But there is an interesting push and pull with that, because you don't want to give up, we just don't want to give up that, autonomy. And so... Yeah, that was a tough lesson for me, and it would take me many years, to get comfortable with that, and to like start letting other people kind of take on the reins. But I don't, I don't think. I mean, there was like lawsuits. There was all. I mean, you name it, it happened. But I don't think we ever felt like that volatile that the whole thing was going to end.
Yeah, sometimes it's just bigger in your head.
Yeah,
Totally.
But I think we did do a good job of bringing on people to really help us navigate all of it, who had experience that we didn't, and I think that was really crucial to our growth and success.
Yeah.
Actually, I would love to talk about that, because you brought up bringing on a new CEO and raising private capital, and so I want to kind of talk through that whole journey of doing the raise, starting to bring in outside money. Kind of making that transition, and how you went through that.
Well, we knew that if we wanted, like I was mentioning before, we knew if we wanted to grow, we couldn't grow organically. So we knew we needed to raise money. And when we raised our first big tranche of money, I think it was like $25 million from Castanea. And in that deal, they were like, hey, we think that like you guys are going to need a professional CEO, which I actually didn't love the idea. And I liked my brother being the CEO, and I didn't want to change the company culture. And I thought that like we had really landed in a good place with that, but they were like, it's gonna get over his head, and he's never really done this before. And so they went on a CEO search, which I was like, well, I'm not talking to anybody. And they're like, well, we'll bring you people and see if you like anybody. And I was like, I won't. I was such a brat about it. But eventually, they did, and we met John Hefner, who's now actually the CEO of Summer Fridays, and he was great, and we like totally fell in love with him instantly. We were like, oh, this guy's amazing, and he turned out to be really amazing, and really helped us like put a lot more process and structure in place. And we used to call him like the adult in the room, because it was like me and my brother, and sometimes we would have like silly fights, and we would we were like children. And John came in and really like helped us navigate a lot of things. So his experience was really valuable to us, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like being able to kind of navigate that, bringing on people you trust, like you said, and being able to still trust your instinct.
Yeah.
As you kind of went through that process, was there any maybe advice, tips that you'd like to give out to anyone of going from that process of kind of the surrendering process, I guess, like you said, of kind of releasing some of that control, starting to build your team, starting to really scale. Is there any maybe tips or pieces of advice that have stuck with you from that time?
Well, I think it's like, it's for me, it was once I finally like started to let go of the feeling of like I have to be in control of everything and I have to have my hands on everything. I remember having a lot of conversations with John about it, and he was like, and my brother, it's like, what's my highest and best use? Like, how am I supporting the growth and the betterment of the company? And what things can I relinquish? And I think once I got comfortable in that space, it was mostly freeing for me because I didn't have to like be in the weeds on everything anymore. And I think that was like a big unlock for me. And I think it's a thing that, a lot of founders struggle with is like wanting to be attached to everything, and that, and then you end up in burnout and you end up like, and I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs. One of the things I recently started was this thing called the Messy Collective, where it's, hundreds of female entrepreneurs who are, basically getting advice from me. I bring on other entrepreneurs, they get advice from each other. But there is that, like, everybody kind of has that, where I just want to do everything and I don't want to relinquish control. And I talk to so many women who are like doing everything, and I'm like, you need to hire people, and you should have hired them 6 months ago. And I'm a big like hire ahead of the curve kind of gal. Like, you want to hire people before you have to hire people, so you're not in the scramble to hire somebody, you don't end up hiring the wrong person. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that was a big thing for me that I had to learn, and I really try to impart on other entrepreneurs now, that like, you don't have to do everything yourself. And frankly, you're probably not good at everything, and that's the other thing that people have, that's when our egos get in the way, and like people have a hard time getting comfortable with that, like, oh, somebody else can do it. And I think it's like a lifestyle thing too, because we put our heart and souls into these companies that we run, and it's like becomes our whole life. And that's just, I used to think that was the way, and I just don't anymore. I think you really have to find some sort of balance. And I have like the second chapter of my book is called Balance is Bullshit. Yes. And I do believe that, because like it is kind of a sliding scale, right?
It's harmony.
Like, it's more like harmony, finding like what works for you on a particular day, Mm-hmm. I'm also on the other side now too, where I just have more freedom in general, and I'm really, really grateful. I've worked really hard for that, and I'm really grateful that I can kind of like pick up and go. I travel a lot now. I do, a lot of things, and I can still do all the things I'm doing, from wherever I am. So I really have a much more, I much more embrace that piece now, whereas when I was building that company, I was just very like heads down. It was also a different time. I think COVID kind of changed everything, and people are more comfortable working from home, and everybody kind of can be remote. And so it's just been like an interesting few years.
Yeah. It's from leaving DryBar, you've done a lot, right? I think, as you're speaking to, and maybe gotten to kind of like expand in different ways. We had Michelle Whaler on from Beyond Yoga not too long ago, and she was kind of mentioning what you were just saying. I was so heads down for so long, and the minute that I stepped out of that role and they sold to Levi's, that she was able to, like, she's like, I'm just so happy now. I want to help everybody. I want to do everything. And you really stepped into a lot of those roles as well. Yeah. You were on guest shark on Shark Tank, which is one of our favorite shows. Such
a great show.
I'm sure that had to be like such a cool moment to step onto that set.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it didn't come through my agents. They actually called me out of the blue. I was on the cover of Inc., which was also such a crazy
pinch me moment
totally. For sure. And they were like, hey, we want you to come on and be a guest shark. And I was like, really? I was like, I can't, like, I'm going to figure out math on the spot. Like, I don't think I want to do that. They're like, don't worry, we'll put you next to Mark, which they did. But no, it was an amazing experience. And that part of my life, and like starting to do things like that, was really so bananas and awesome. And that's, I also realized, like, towards the end of my DryBar era, that I hired my own publicist. Like, I was like, oh, I need to start building my own name, because I'm going to sell this company. I'm going to ultimately outgrow this role that I'm in now, and what's next for me, which I think is an important thing to mention, because I think it's a real thing, and I've really tried to parlay my career from DryBar into other things. And, I speak at a lot of events and I really enjoy that. I mentor women, I invest in a lot of companies. Like I'm kind of always trying on new things, and I think that is, obviously that all comes from DryBar, but it is like, it's a really fun phase for me right now, but I was definitely lost for a couple of years there again. It's like, I think that's kind of how it goes, right? In life, it's like things are going really well. And then you're like, oh shit, everything fell off, you know? Totally. That totally happened to me. But I think it also comes with like, high risk, high reward. And I was, and then I got married and divorced again, which that wasn't part of the plan, but that happened. And then I kind of lost my identity with DryBar and I've been on, this path on the last couple of years of like figuring out who I am again. And, the Messy Collective has been great for that. And I've really enjoyed that. And like I said, I speak a lot. There's a website called Intro. I don't know if you guys know that, where people, go on and talk. I do that too. And I really enjoy that. And then like I said, I'm launching something.
I know, secret that you won't tell
us. It is in the hair world. So.
Oh, I know. We always have to end our little conversations with this question. So we know you can't tell us too much, but maybe you can sprinkle in some teasers or share with us something else since you have so many irons in the fire.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that it has to do with being messy. Okay. And that, I've really embraced if you follow me on Instagram, you know that like I kind of let it all hang out. I'm very vulnerable on my page and like I really try to talk about the real stuff. And because I know how much that helps and resonates with women. And so, I've kind of really leaned into like the messier side of things. And so feel like I'm kind of bringing that into hair.
Oh, I love that. I feel like it's like authenticity. It's like,
well, and the thing is, and
it's messy, but like it's real. Like
that's real. And I think that, it's so important, especially for entrepreneurs or anybody building a business. It's like to build it from a place of authenticity. And for me, I didn't, similar to DryBar, I guess, but like with the Messy Collective and the Messy Truth and like this, I'm kind of building this brand around this idea of being messy, not perfect, and that I largely lived my life in this like trying to be perfect for a long time. And like, that didn't really go well for me, and so I've really embraced this kind of messier side of life, and that is very authentic to me now. It wasn't authentic to me 15 years ago, but it's where I'm at now, and I'm really embracing that and kind of in love with it. So that's why I'm heading down that path, and you'll see more soon.
It's beautiful. It's like giving everyone else permission to be messy.
100%. Yeah,
absolutely. So you were saying that you've been on this discovery to kind of find out who you are. So if you were to explain to anybody who is Alli Webb, what would you want them to know?
Such a good question. I mean, I don't know. I think that, first and foremost, like I kind of feel like I'm kind of like if she did it, I can do it, inspiration to people of like, cause I don't have the pedigree. I didn't go to business school. I didn't even go to college. I went to beauty school and was able to kind of build something remarkable out of nothing, essentially. And so I feel like, I guess that's how I would define myself from a business standpoint. And just that I'm an incredibly curious person. Like I've read a gajillion books about, spirituality and just like being the best version of myself and like, wanting, there was a couple of years there where I didn't like how I was showing up for my kids and how I shifted that. And I'm such a seeker. I think that would probably be like my biggest adjective is I'm such a seeker. I'm always seeking, whether it's in business or professionally or personally, I'm just always seeking things. So, and I think that that's really helped me, be successful in all the areas of my life. It's kind of always trying to learn, always asking questions, always like wanting to know more and stretch myself. And so,
I love that. You offer so much to women every single day. You mentor them, you're vulnerable, you give them insights. What is any way that we can support you? Anybody listening to this, how can we give back into you and pour back into you?
I'm always so grateful when, people are embracing what I'm doing because I think it's so full circle, I love building companies. I love supporting women. I love being a cheerleader for women. And so, I think it's kind of like, I just, I want to build things that women love. And I love when, I'm so grateful when people love it and embrace it. And whether they're using a product or reading my book or whatever it is, that really fills me up.
Okay. Love it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alli,
Thank
for
you so
being
much.
on the podcast.
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks
this
for having
was such
me.
a great conversation. And we're so excited to see everything you're rolling out.
Thank
We
you.
will
Thank
definitely
you.
be on the lookout. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe for more content.
Follow us at Forward Female or at Her Next Big Move, where we share even more awesome content, tips, advice, resources for you to make your next big move.